Welcome back for another cool Friday night in. We've got a brand new one for you to chill your bones to. Tonight, we'll be following a group of convicts as they find themselves somewhere even worse than prison. Have a couple drinks ready for this one, and we'll see you on the other side. This is PICKAWAY. I didn't believe the sentence when it was handed out by the judge. I couldn't. I'd always believed, one way or another, justice would prevail, and false convictions were something of myths and catastrophizers. But now here I was, on the other side of one. The sound my wife Jess made while sitting in the benches behind me with our 4-year-old daughter, Scarlett, will chill me until my last breath. 25 years. Scarlett will be almost 30 by the time I see her next. As a free man, anyway. How the fuck did this happen? I went back over the night that caused this, for the millionth time. I'd been angry that day, sure. I'd always had a temper. That was what the prosecutors had keyed on, and it worked out well for them. They marched in witnesses of all kinds with anecdotes and examples of my quick loss of composure during confrontations. They'd even used our neighbors. I couldn't argue against anything they were saying about my past. It was all true. Maybe a bit slanted, but I was quick to blow up on occasion, especially when it came to Scarlett. I never felt protective over anything like I did the moment she was born, and I saw how vulnerable she was. Scarlett had always been curious about our neighbor, Mr. Monahan. He was of the old guard, vending machine generation, but was sweet on her. We'd let her go over to visit, and he'd have some kind of treats or snacks for her. One afternoon, though, Scarlett came back crying. She'd been drinking some lemonade, but had dropped the glass and broke it on the floor. Monahan spanked her. Jess and I had never laid a hand on her, and weren't planning on it being any part of future punishments. Scarlett was just too sweet and never did anything wrong. When she told me what happened, all I could see was red. I was overcome with rage and rushed over and confronted Monahan about it on his front lawn. It was heated. I won't say it wasn't, but it wasn't physical. Either way, several neighbors witnessed it, and that was offered up as motive. On the stand, I explained what happened that night. I'd calmed down and decided to go and speak to Monahan a little after 9. When I got there, his back door was open, so I entered and called out his name, asking if he was home. And then he stumbled out of the shadows and into me. He was covered in blood, a knife sticking out of his chest. I lost my balance, and we collapsed on top of each other. I tried to help him, and made the biggest mistake of all. I pulled the knife out of his chest. He immediately started bleeding out worse than he had already. But even more frightening, my fingerprints were now all over the murder weapon. Jess came in at that moment and saw the scene. If you ask her now, she'll say she knows in her heart of hearts I didn't do it. But in that moment, when she came in and saw Monahan and I on the ground, covered in blood with a knife in my hand, I saw it in her eyes. She believed I had, and who could blame her? There'd been a full investigation and sweep of the house. No signs of forced entry, just me. No witnesses, just my word against their perceived version of reality. My lawyer filed an appeal immediately, but that was a Hail Mary, especially without any new evidence. 25 years. Everything after sentencing moved quickly. I was shuffled away before getting to say goodbye to Jess and Scarlett. Before I knew it, I was chained to another inmate, and a dozen of us were being loaded onto a reinforced prison transport bus to be taken to a max security facility. I was going to be bunking with the worst people in the state. The man, if you can call him that, I was chained to was named John Wheatley Jr. He was a filthy psycho with long, stringy hair who never stopped talking. I heard his whole story before the bus even left the courthouse. Him and his father had been serial rapists, terrorizing up and down the West Coast, through Northern California and up into Oregon. During a sting to catch the duo, John had been caught, but his dad got away and was somewhere out there. John seemed to have all the stats on everyone on the bus, including me. He spoke about the 2 guys next to us. One was the tallest, largest black guy I'd ever seen. He had to lean forward because his head rubbed against the ceiling while he was sitting. His name was Don Richter, but people called him the Richter Scale. He was a drug dealer who had been given a bad batch, and his mind had gone off the deep end. He'd killed everyone in his apartment building and stacked their bodies in the furnace room, planning to burn them and the property before he was discovered. He was chained to a man named Colson Lang. Colson was a bit of a celebrity in the world of serial killers, apparently. He'd been a BTK copycat, binding, torturing, and killing his victims. John said his IQ was off the charts, and he'd been a software developer with a family of 6 at home. They had to change their name and move to a new state when Colson's extracurriculars were discovered. The bus finally started moving, and everyone got quiet, except for John. He was excited and had that orange crush-stained smile. I don't think his teeth had ever been clean. It was a 6-hour drive to the prison through stormy backcountry, and all I could think about was the judge handing me my sentence. 25 years. There goes my life. I tried to sleep on the drive, but it was no use. I didn't think I'd ever fall asleep again. John nudged me, getting my attention, and recommended I brace for impact. I had no idea what that meant. I opened my eyes and realized we were now driving through old farmland, and a heavy storm had started. John was facing the rear of the bus, his back pressed up against the seat in front of us. He told me to brace again. At that moment, I looked ahead. The 2 police cruisers that were escorting us suddenly spun out of control and went off the road like their tires had gone out. Then our own tires blew out, and the bus flipped and barrel rolled into a ravine. I blacked out, but was awoken by gunfire and John yelling for me to get up. We'd been dislodged from our anchor points on the bus, but still chained together, and John was pulling me towards the rear doors. Richter and Coulson, still chained together, were following our leads. The back door of the bus was bent in, but Richter used his shoulders and broke it outwards. Gunfire outside the bus continued to spray, lining the ceiling with holes. John pulled me out of the bus and was trying to look around to the front, but the storm was raging too hard. It sounded like there was a shootout between the 1 or 2 remaining officers and someone else. Then I heard John yell the word, "Dad," and it made sense. His dad had orchestrated a transport intercept to get his son out, and now we were a part of it. Bullets were spraying everywhere, and we couldn't see what was happening from down where we were. Richter and Coulson started booking it towards a large, dying cornfield. John, pissed off from abandoning his father, grabbed me and told me to run. I was operating on pure adrenaline and felt concussed from the accident. It wasn't immediately obvious to me what I was doing and how guilty it made me look to run. I tried to stop, but John yanked me forward and said he'd kill me if I didn't sprint. I knew the further I ran, the longer my sentence would go when we were inevitably caught. But in that moment, I was too terrified to stop. What was waiting for me in prison anyway? Claustrophobia and daily shower rape? Coulson led us into the woods beyond the cornfield, and we found ourselves following a stream for a mile or 2. We came out on the other side of the woods and found ourselves in a large clearing. There was an old farmhouse ahead. It looked huge and out of place, run down and forgotten. That's where we were headed. As we got closer, my fear grew more and more. What was I doing with these 3 maniacs? We got to the house, and above the threshold, the words "Pickaway House" were carved into the frame. We pushed the door open and entered. The house appeared abandoned. Coulson gave directions that we needed to find tools to break the chains, clothes to change into, and weapons if we could. Quickly, we found a hammer and axe. We broke the chains, and the 3 of them rushed upstairs to look for clothes or weapons. I grabbed an iron poker from the fireplace and managed to pry the cuffs from my wrists. Finally, with a moment to myself, I sat down by the window to catch my breath. I started to think about Jess. I wonder what she was doing right now. How long until the news picked up on this? And how long until she found out I was a part of a jailbreak? One I didn't even want to be a part of. The idea of running back to the bus came to me, but what if I got back and these 3 got taken later? We'd all end up back in the same jail, and they'd know I ran on them. That would undoubtedly make my jail experience far worse. I didn't know what to do. Then I saw the tree line with dozens of agents holding flashlights and moving through the woods and into the clearing. It was both a relief and horror to see them. Now I didn't need to run, but this could also turn really bad. What if there's a standoff? What if John, Richter, and Coulson find guns upstairs? Then I heard John yell out. He was looking out the window and saw the search party entering the clearing and approaching the farmhouse. The 3 men rushed downstairs, still in their orange jumpsuits. Richter and John freaked out, but Coulson kept his head. I could tell he was very cerebral. He was formulating a plan. We were all going to go into the basement and hide. As the search party entered, we would take 1 officer out at a time, strip them, and wear their uniforms. Then we would rejoin the search party in their place and split up, going our separate ways from there. It was a pretty good plan, for them anyway. I wanted no part of it, but I kept remembering, if I backstab them and we all end up back in prison, they'll kill me, or worse. So I kept my mouth shut and decided to follow whatever they said. But we couldn't get the basement door open. It was solid. Not even Richter could pull it off or break it down. Coulson ordered us upstairs where we'd hide in one of the rooms. I followed them up and saw the 2nd floor for the first time. There were 4 bedrooms, all empty. We piled into the closet of the master bedroom, the plan staying the same. I couldn't imagine us surviving this. I imagined the cops turning the corner, seeing us crammed into the closet, and opening fire. Why wouldn't they? They probably thought we were responsible for the deaths of all the cops in the transport. What a horrible feeling, thinking I'd be dying in some strange closet with these monsters. But minutes were passing, and we hadn't heard anyone come into the farmhouse. Were they setting up a perimeter? Formulating their own plan? Knowing we were likely hiding inside? A few more minutes passed, and Coulson decided to look outside. And that's when everything became really strange. The search party had walked right past the farmhouse. They hadn't come in and checked or anything. In fact, as I looked out the window and watched them, it seemed like they didn't even see the farmhouse. Like they looked either right past it or right through it. We watched as the officers and agents continued across the field. They set up a large search party headquarters a few hundred yards away. More and more officers and agents arrived. Were they waiting for the army to show up? The storm was still going, and the day was descending into dusk. We moved downstairs and watched the search party. They'd spread out all over the county, it looked like. I could even see them going into other farms in the far distance and searching through them, but finding nothing. It dawned on John that as long as we stayed inside the farmhouse, the search party wouldn't be able to find us. We just needed to stay here, inside, until they passed fully. Then we could make our run for it. John and Richter were thrilled with this. It was clear they weren't the slightest bit worried about why no one had come in to find us, or had even been able to see the farmhouse. I shouldn't have been surprised. They weren't that worried. Anywhere was better than prison for these guys. I could tell Coulson's mind was running though, trying to make sense of it, as was I, but there was no sense. Either the search party didn't want to come in, or they flat out didn't see the house. Either option was frightening, and I wanted out. I hatched a plan to try to sneak away that night when the others were asleep. I could get to an officer and explain what happened, tell him where the others were hiding. I might sound crazy, but this was all crazy. Since the arrest, everything felt like a nightmare had spilled into my reality. An hour later, it was pitch black out, and the storm had gotten worse. We couldn't even see the search party anymore, outside of their dim headlights through the rain. John hadn't stopped talking, and was more or less celebrating that we were safe and clear, though he was nervous that Father had been killed in the shootout, and was cursing himself for running off after the bus flip. There was just so much gunfire. Coulson was quiet. I could tell he was taking it all in from different angles. He went upstairs, and John followed shortly after. I stared out the window in the living room, watching the storm coming down and thinking about Jess and Scarlett. I played out scenarios in my head where one night I show up at home and we get all our money and make a run for the border and raise our daughter in Mexico. It was a crazy idea, but I figured I was looking at an additional 10 years now for being dragged along in this stunt. So it was either 35 years, minimum, behind bars, or run. I had a lot to think about tonight, not to mention the fact that there was something wrong with this farmhouse, and I had a disturbing feeling that when we try to leave in the morning, it won't be as simple as walking out the front door. I turned away from the window and was startled by Richter. He was standing in front of the basement door, fixated on it. He made me so uneasy. He easily had over 200 pounds on me, most of which was raw animal muscle. He was about 6 inches taller than me too, and the last person I wanted to be alone in a room with for more than a second. At least his attention was on the door, for now. My adrenaline rush was finally starting to drop, and I felt sleep coming on. I tried to stay awake, but it was useless. I fell into a deep, nightmarish slumber. It was filled with horrors, but none worse than the last one, the one that rang true. I'd gotten to Jess and Scarlett, sneaking home one night, and I asked them to run with me. Jess had said no. Hearing that word gave me more pain than any I've ever felt, awake or asleep. I woke up as a roar of thunder shook the farmhouse, but I could have sworn I heard a scream layered in with it. I took in my surroundings quickly and realized I was alone in the living room, face pressed against the window as the storm continued to rage. Aside from being alone, only one thing seemed different from before I fell asleep. The basement door was wide open. I picked up my fire poker and approached the doorway. I looked down, and despite it being dark, I could see a shape standing at the bottom of the stairs. The shape was so large it was undeniably Richter, but he was trembling. I could see his breath, even from up here. I backed away, thinking about shutting the door and locking him down there, but figured I didn't need to give him a reason to try to kill me. I moved into the kitchen instead and decided to sneak out the back door. Now was the time to take my chance at running. I'd go to the cops and tell them what I could. However the cards dropped from there, I'd have to live with. But the kitchen door wouldn't budge. The knob wouldn't even turn. It was frozen into place. I fumbled with it, trying to assess whether it was jammed or stuck, but it felt like I was trying to move a part of the wall. There was no give at all. I thought about breaking the window, but knew that would be too loud. So I took a rag, wrapped it around my fist, and gently pressed it against one of the kitchen window panes. It wasn't budging either. I tried to apply more and more pressure, very slowly, so it'd cause the glass to crack but not shatter. But again, it felt like I was pushing against the house itself. We were trapped inside, at least on the first floor. Maybe I could find a breakable window upstairs. I wasn't crazy about the idea, as I didn't know where John or Coulson were, and what they might do if they found me alone. I didn't trust anyone here. I didn't even trust the house. Maybe it was paranoid, but they were violent criminals. What was one more murder during a prison break? I nervously carried my fire poker upstairs, but found the hallway had changed since I'd first come up when we arrived. The hall had gotten longer, and now had 4 doors on each side and 1 at the end. I remember there was only 4 in total before, but somehow they'd doubled. Had I misremembered it the first time? I walked forward, passing the first 2 doors. Neither of them had windows. They were both covered in wood panel walls. I knew that wasn't right. I'd seen windows in them earlier. I continued on and found all 8 doors led to more rooms without windows. The final door led to a room that was filled with stacks of newspapers and a window on the far wall. I went to the window and looked out. The search party appeared to be moving away as the storm was getting heavier. I tried to press against the glass again, but it wouldn't budge. It might as well have been cement. My attention turned to the shortest stack of newspapers, which was beside me. It was spanning back decades, even a century. The headlines were for a serial killer who'd been arrested, but escaped prison and disappeared. The next one was for a mass murderer who'd gotten away during a police pursuit and was now missing after a baffling disappearance. Then another, but this one had John Wheatley Jr. on the cover. It spoke of him and his exploits. I flipped it over. The next one horrified me. It was a newspaper that had next week's date on it, but looked like it had been there for 50 years, just like the rest of them. It spoke of the prison transport bus being intercepted by John Wheatley Sr., who died in the ensuing shootout, and of the convicts that managed to escape and had not been found. There was my name, my face. I backed away, not wanting to read anymore, but went right into another pile, knocking it over. The pile spilled across the floor, headlines filled with articles on killers and rapists disappearing, large manhunts spreading across states, even the country, but never seen again. And my name and face was there, scattered amongst them. And that concludes episode number 22 of 10 Minute Horror. We hope Pickaway kept you on the edge of your seat throughout, and we'll see you back here next Friday night for part 2.